This document is a big step forward in a positive way. When you view this through the eyes of the producer, it completely changes the ballgame. They vertically integrate, they compete unfairly with their producers. Hey, that's not okay. How you actually implement these recommendations, that's where the rubber hits the road.
Platforms have two customer groups, right? So when you look at who the producers are, when you look at who the suppliers are on all these businesses, the way platform business models work is there's a consumer on one side and there's a producer on the other side, right? The platform business model is grounded in the fact that it creates value by facilitating exchange, the exchange of value. They're asset light because the inventory that a consumer is consuming actually doesn't sit on the balance sheet of the platform, right? That inventory is being contributed into the platform by a third party. For Facebook, those are content creators, whether on Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp. You're sending messages, you're posting, status updates or photos or videos. On Google, Google Search, which is specifically what the report focuses on, it's focusing on Google Search. So those are other third-party websites. On Amazon, those are third-party sellers, right? Sellers that are putting inventory into Amazon, that inventory doesn't sit on Amazon's balance sheet, right? On Apple, it's app developers, right? Apple doesn't have a balance sheet with millions of apps on the balance sheet. Apple isn't hiring millions of developers to go and make these millions of apps. Those apps are created by third-party developers. And what you will find in every large one of these tech monopolies is that, yes, there are small mom and pop producers on the platform. And then there are actually much larger producers, right? People build businesses being a producer, selling or creating value that is then monetized through the platform, right? That could be, media businesses built on the back of Facebook or YouTube. That could be, businesses built on the back of Google Search. There's a myriad of those. Selling and distribution businesses built on the back of Amazon. We've covered Anker, for example, that just went public. They literally built the entire business selling products on Amazon. That was it. They didn't even create a website. All they did was say, I'm just going to create products and sell them on Amazon, and that's my business. I'm not even going to bother creating a website. Just had $1 billion IPO a month ago. And then the last one here is Apple. You have so many businesses that it's just an app, right? And that is the business. And you have multi-billion dollar businesses, and they are app businesses, and Apple and the Google App Store are their main gatekeepers. So when you say in regard to that, are these platforms putting those supplier customers out of business? And the answer actually is yes, they do that. And so what we talk about on the show, the two biggest gripes of producers are I get penalized by the platform and I have no recourse. I can't do anything. I built my livelihood, whether small or a large business, working on this platform, which is now a monopoly. And I just got kicked off. What am I to do? And you have no recourse. That's one. Number two is the platform now charges you money or raises the prices on you, right? I'm an Amazon seller. I was paying 15%. Now it's the holidays. I'm paying 25%. I can't make any money. I'm losing money now. What do? I have all this inventory and now I have to sell it for a loss or I have to go bankrupt. What do you do, right? We've seen this with Uber and countless other examples. Those are the two biggest challenges. It's the platform just arbitrarily taking action on the producer. And that absolutely does happen to small businesses and large ones, as we've seen now Spotify versus Apple. We've seen Expedia versus Google Search. We've seen that lyrics.com versus Google Search. And all of this is documented in this House Judiciary document. It's a little bit long. It's over 400 pages. But there's a few things that I want to call out if we go through this, a few things that I thought was pretty interesting and that they did well. Now, make no mistake, this document is a very big step forward for classifying these tech businesses, these dominant platform tech companies as monopolies, which they are. The question is, how bad is it to be a tech monopoly for society, for consumers versus for producers? this document does a good job of documenting, all of the different characteristics and ins and outs of these platforms. And they also do a good job of keeping the scope actually somewhat narrowed. They do a good job of saying, hey, for Google, we're not looking at all of Google. We're just looking at Google search, right? For Amazon, we're looking at their product marketplace, not AWS. So it does a good job of narrowing the scope of what they're classifying as a monopoly. Here, they're talking about their findings with Amazon. And Amazon recognizes that it competes against many of its third-party sellers. In response to concerns about its unfair use of third-party seller data, Amazon points to its seller data protection policy, which it instituted in 2014. According to the company, this is from Amazon's documents, Amazon recognizes that third-party sellers are our customers too. There it is. This right here is frankly the crux to why these tech monopolies are monopolies, right? You don't want to view this through the lens of the consumer, because through the lens of the consumer, you can say, oh, well, buying stuff online, you can buy products from a bunch of different places online, right? Amazon will say, oh, well, we only control, I think now it's approaching 10% of overall retail. And maybe it's like 40% of e-commerce or something, like maybe approaching 50% of e-commerce. Which, usually the threshold is around a 70% threshold to say, look, they are the large majority of the market, hence a monopoly. And they have that monopoly market power. So if you view this through the eyes of the consumer, then you would say, oh, well, they're not monopolies. When you view this through the eyes of the producer, it completely changes the ballgame. And here you have it, page 276. Amazon recognizes that third-party sellers are our customers too. And their trust is critical to Amazon's success. In an effort to further this partnership, Amazon has decided years ago to take additional voluntary steps to protect seller data by instituting its voluntarily adopted seller data protection policy, which prohibits Amazon retail teams, the people doing white label products and Amazon Basics and all these things, from using non-public seller-specific data to compete against third-party sellers. The problem is they had this policy and then a bunch of people broke it. Whether willingly or Amazon leadership knew about it or they didn't, point is it was broken, and there's plenty of evidence of it being broken in a variety of different scenarios. So you have this inherent vertical integration from Amazon launching their own products, both competing against their sellers in multiple ways. One, as a 1P, so buying the product and then reselling it themselves as a reseller. That's inherently competitive with the 3P model, where you have third-party inventory from sellers. And then launching their own product lines with Amazon Basics and other white label products. Both of those things are directly in competition with having third-party sellers. They say, oh, well, we had this policy, you can't use any non-public data. Problem is, policy was broken a bunch of times. So when you are the seller and now Amazon's taking advantage of you, what do, right? You have no recourse. This document actually has some proposed about what sellers could do if a law is passed. But this is the key thing. If the producers can be considered a customer, then antitrust precedent fits. If we need to wait on Congress to pass a law for these things to go into place, we're going to be waiting around for a very long time. The existing antitrust laws that have been around for decades fit when you have this linkage that sellers, suppliers, producers, bundle them are customers of a platform business. It is inherent to the whole platform business model, definition, and structure. They have two customer groups. I can't emphasize that point enough. I guess I can't because I need to keep doing it because the DOJ and just others haven't latched on to this as well as they should have. Because in that scenario, if you say, does Amazon control over 70% of the market for a third-party seller that's looking to sell their stuff online? The math is very easy. Amazon absolutely has over 70% market share of selling products in a marketplace model online. So now if you are a seller and you're considered a customer to Amazon, now Amazon has monopolistic market power over that customer base, the sellers. And then the question is, do they take advantage of the sellers? And then basically this document documents a bunch of information and a bunch of cases where Amazon has absolutely taken advantage of their customers, the seller. Similarly, you can apply that same logic to how Google search has taken advantage of other websites that Google competes directly with by launching Google's own branded product pages and charging those websites ads if they want to be at the top of the search listings, right? That goes back to that second point around producers' biggest gripe around having the platform raise fees on them arbitrarily, and the producer can't do anything about it. And then that linkage will easily apply to Apple when we look at how they take advantage of app developers. Particularly Spotify has a really good case. It gets much easier to make the case when you see the platform vertically integrating and competing directly with their producers, right? So Apple Music versus Spotify. It becomes harder actually with Facebook. So Facebook actually has the least amount of vertical integration in the respect of competing with its content creators, right? And so actually in terms of, I would say, monopolistic kind of aggressive antitrust threat level, because of that lack of vertical integration on Facebook's behalf, I'd actually say they have the least exposure if you look at it through that lens, which is how I look through it. So very simply, to spare you from looking through this whole thing, there's actually some good recommendations when you hop down to page 375. And some of these recommendations touch on those two big gripes that I was referring to. Reduce conflicts of interest through structural separations and line of business restrictions. This point and the next point, implement rules to prevent discrimination, favoritism, and self-preferencing, right? The first point, they're also saying that you could look at breaking up Google search and YouTube. That doesn't really make a difference because you still have a monopoly in Google search. You're not fixing the problems on Google search if you break off YouTube. Yeah, you're kind of limiting some of the negative impact, but you're not fundamentally correcting the problem, which is the problem on Google search, which is very powerful and a monopoly in its own right, saying, what do I need to do to fix it? And so the short of breaking the companies up, I think there's a lot to do in the operations of the companies, which they touch on more so in this second section here, starting on page 381, implementing rules to prevent discrimination, favoritism, and self-preferencing, right? So this gets to, hey, you're vertically integrated. So they have a whole paragraph using Google as an example here, right? So web publishers of content, Google demoted their pages, had no way of competing on the merits. Numerous third parties told the subcommittee that self-preferencing and discriminatory treatment by the dominant platforms force businesses to lay off employees and divert resources away. It's pretty straightforward, right? They vertically integrate, they compete unfairly with their producers. Hey, that's not okay. And the producers are small businesses and have no recourse. They can't do anything against the big bad platform monopoly. Interoperability, I'm less bullish on this. It sounds nice at a high level from a implementation standpoint. It's all wonky and it never really works. We've seen this in healthcare where there's actually a law telling these health insurance companies they need to be interoperable. That was like 2 years ago. Where are we today on that? Yeah, we're nowhere. Reduce market power through merger presumptions. Yeah, maybe this will work. It puts the onus of the merger on the monopoly, on the acquiring company to prove that it's not a conflict, as opposed to the way the law reads is the government needs to show there is a conflict, right? So it puts the onus on the monopoly as opposed to the government. That might help, right? So it prevents maybe Google search being more acquisitive to bolster Google search, but it's kind of a moot point because at that point, you don't really need to do any mega acquisitions. They use this example with Facebook and Instagram. When Facebook bought Instagram, I don't think Facebook had nearly the level of market power and dominance and kind of classification as a monopoly as it does today. So I don't really know, even if you had that in place, if it would have put Facebook into the monopoly bucket to prevent them from buying Instagram. Facebook was big, but they're nowhere near what they are today. So this is a good one. 6, prohibit abuse of superior bargaining power and require due process, right? So this is saying, hey, I'm the platform. I'm going to pressure you. You got to give me your data. You're a seller on Amazon. You need to give me your purchase order so I can see where you're buying your products from. And then the seller on Amazon just goes around the Amazon employee just goes around the third-party seller, sources the product directly from the manufacturer, and cuts out their third-party seller, helping out Amazon's 1P business and hurting the third-party seller in the process. This has happened. We've documented on the show many times. There's been many cases here where the platform abuses that negotiating power with the producer, whether that's in adjudicating penalties or negotiating terms. And so this helps to give some protection to those producers that really have no leverage in any kind of negotiation or fighting back against a penalty that the platform has brought down upon them. So those are the recommendations in terms of how to help regulate. And actually, when you think about the two things we've been talking about on the show, a number of them do line up. I don't think the Republican version of this report will support breaking up the tech monopolies, and I think that's kind of much ado about nothing. It sounds nice and it makes the press, but I don't think it's really fixing the problem anyway. How you actually implement these recommendations, that's where the rubber hits the road, and there actually isn't as much meat around that. I'm not taking away from the importance of this document. This document is a big step forward in a positive way. The key here to implementation is having these rules and these guidelines be specific to each company. This is the problem with just passing one big law that just applies to Facebook, Amazon, Google, and Apple. And magically, these rules just solve all the problems. It won't happen. These companies are so big and are so different that each company needs separate regulation and separate oversight. And it's not totally clear that that's what they're getting at here. The idea, again, is nice at a high level. Agency enforcement and the role of the FTC and so on and so forth. But making these provisions specific to each tech monopoly is the key for this stuff to work. Those are the immediate takeaways. I might go deeper into this, but it's a step in the right direction. Let's see where the Republican report comes in. We're still a long way away from any law actually being passed. And I think the DOJ could move a lot faster. And they have the antitrust precedent that I'm talking about here. If anything, this report should help the DOJ really establish that linkage between producers or customers too, in the words of Amazon's own documents. And with that, they can run. We'll see if they do or not. But that's the initial take on where we're at with this antitrust release that came out. We'll continue to follow it and keep you updated. Hi, this is Alex from Winner Take All. Thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoyed the content. Feel free to leave a comment, ask us questions, and definitely make sure to join us on our next live stream.